I wasn't looking for a mistake. I just wanted to see the stars closer. On top of the hill, behind a creaky wooden house in Linden, Vermont, where snow and old ash covered the ground, a boy lay on his back, eyes fixed on the sky. The telescope beside him, its paint chipped and legs uneven, had once belonged to his grandfather. The name, Walter Miller, 1976, was barely visible on its side. The wind whistled through the pine trees, and the stars opened like windows into the universe, cold, distant, and endlessly inviting. Ethan Miller was only 13, but his eyes held galaxies. Not the kind of dreamy stargazing his mother sighed about, but a deeper focus, a hunger to understand. Why do things move? Why is there light? What happens beyond the edge of a black hole? Since his grandfather passed a quiet man who fixed aircrafts and taught Ethan how to read star maps instead of comic books, the night sky had become his refuge. Every evening, Ethan took notes, plotted coordinates, tracked shifts in starlight. He learned how to read Messier catalogs, how to recognize redshift, and that some of the stars we see had actually died millions of years ago. Tonight was clear. A Friday night. Ethan opened his old laptop, the Wi-Fi signal barely holding on from the fire station down the hill. He only wanted to watch a live stream lecture from Harvard where Professor Leonard Grayson, a leading expert on rotating black holes, would be presenting a new theoretical model. "You have to go to bed soon, honey." His mother's voice called out from the window, weak from her late shift at the grocery store. "I will," Mom Ethan answered, eyes still locked on the screen. The event. Horizon telescopes. Recent observations push us closer to refining the mass-radius correlation for rotating black holes. Professor Grayson stood on the stage behind him, a whiteboard filled with looping equations like tangled webs. Ethan opened his notebook and started writing. Kerr, metric event, horizon radius r, plus equals gm over c squared plus the square root of open parenthesis, gm over c squared, close, parenthesis, squared minus, open parenthesis, j over m times c, close parenthesis, squared. Ethan underlined each variable, g, the gravitational constant, m, the mass of the black hole, c, the speed of light, j, the angular momentum. Then he frowned. Grayson added an extra term to the equation plus beta squared, suggesting it accounted for dark matter effects. Ethan stopped writing. He had read Kip Thorne's papers, watched NASA explain M87, and never seen this term before. He flipped through his notes to the classic Schwarzschild formula R equals 2gm over c squared. No beta. Ever. In Kerr metric, the expression inside the square root was always the difference between gravitational force and rotational effect. Adding beta squared not only made the formula messy, it also risked making the square root negative if j was too large. Which means a black hole could just vanish in that model. Ethan sat frozen. No. I must be wrong, he thought. I'm just a kid with a rusted telescope and he's a Harvard professor. But still, he replayed the video, rewrote the formula again and again. 4 times. Each time the same discomfort grew inside him. Mom Ethan said quietly, stepping inside, clutching his notebook. The house smelled of canned soup. The lamp flickered above his mother's bandaged hand. She had fallen again at work in the freezer room. "What is it, baby?" "I think Professor Grayson made a mistake in his black hole equation." Rebecca Miller put her tea down. "Ethan, don't say things like that. People like him spend their whole lives learning this. And you? Well, you're not even in high school yet." "But Mom, if you keep that variable and the mass calculation gets thrown off. It's like adding feet and meters without converting them." "I don't get it, sweetie." "But I know Harvard won't listen to you. Go to sleep. Big day tomorrow." Ethan nodded, but inside he already knew he couldn't ignore this, not because he wanted fame, because the stars did not lie. They spun and died by the laws of math. No one had the right to get them wrong, not even a professor. At midnight, while the house slept, Ethan sat at the kitchen table and typed a short email. Dear Professor Leonard Grayson, my name is Ethan Miller. I am 13 years old and I live in Vermont. I just watched your lecture. I may be wrong, but in your formula for the Kerr rotating black hole, there is one term that made me pause. He carefully typed each symbol using plain text, explained with numbers, no attitude, just curiosity. He clicked send. 3 days passed. No reply. Ethan checked his inbox again and again. That night, when he revisited the Harvard site, he saw a reply, but not from Grayson. It came from the teaching assistant. Please do not interrupt serious academic discussion with unfounded speculation from someone without qualifications. Ethan stared at the line. His cheeks flushed not with shame, but a rare, quiet anger. He looked back up at the sky. The Cygnus constellation was slipping westward, leaving a dark patch in the middle of the sky. I wasn't trying to interrupt, Ethan whispered. I just wanted to see the stars more clearly. Ethan sat alone on the steps of the town library, notebook open on his lap. The wind carried the scent of pine and the smoke from someone's wood stove. It was a Tuesday afternoon in early spring, but Vermont didn't care what the calendar said. The wind still bit through layers, and Ethan's hands trembled slightly, not from the cold, but from the quiet anger still burning in him. He had sent the email. He had tried to explain his concern, and he had been dismissed, unqualified. Unfounded speculation, words meant to shut a door. Ethan hadn't even tried to open for himself. But for truth, he flipped through his notes again. Page after page of scribbles, graphs, attempts to rederive the Kerr metric from the Einstein field equations. In most textbooks, the Schwarzschild solution is the simplest kind of black hole, non-rotating, spherical, no electric charge. Its radius, the so-called event horizon, can be calculated with a simple formula, R equals 2gm over c squared. But real black holes spin. Some like the one at the center of our galaxy. Spin so fast, they drag space itself around them. That is when the Kerr solution applies. Its formula is more complex. In simplified form, R equals gm over c squared, plus or minus the square root of gm over c squared minus j over m times c squared j is the angular momentum. And that square root, it must always stay real and positive. If it turns imaginary, it means the black hole has no event horizon, no border, just a naked singularity, a forbidden concept in general relativity. That was the problem. Professor Grayson's version added an extra squared term plus beta squared to account for hypothetical dark matter effects. It sounded elegant, but in Ethan's analysis, it broke the math. Even if dark matter curves space-time, he whispered to himself, it should appear in the stress-energy tensor, not as a free term in the horizon equation. He did not say it to sound smart. He said it because it felt wrong. But no one else had said anything. The lecture had over 100,000 views. The comments were all praise. Physicists, students. Even NASA engineers had liked it. No one had questioned it. Ethan pressed his pencil to his notebook and wrote, "What if no one wants to be the one to raise their hand?" That night, over microwaved shepherd's pie, Ethan sat silently while his mother Rebecca talked about work. Her back hurt again. The new manager at the grocery store had cut hours, then asked her to train 2 new hires at once. "But enough about me," she said gently, noticing Ethan picking at his food. "What's going on in that head of yours?" Ethan looked up. His eyes were serious. Too serious for someone his age. "I think I need to go to Cambridge." She blinked. "Massachusetts. There is a science event at Harvard next month. Our school is allowed to send 3 students. It is for the state science fair finalists. I could try to get on the list." Rebecca leaned back, sighing. Ethan, we have talked about this. We don't have money for trips. I don't need money. I just need your permission. I can share a ride. I have $20 saved. That is enough for lunch. I just want to be in the room. Mom. Just once. She studied him like she was searching his face for some clue. He was not begging. He was not pouting. He was glowing. You are 13, I know. She put her fork down. Why do I feel like this is more than just a school trip? Ethan hesitated. Because I think I found something real, something important, and I want to see if anyone else can see it too. Rebecca rubbed her temples, exhausted, but somewhere inside her, beneath the layers of worry, debt pain, there was still the young mother who had read star books to her baby boy while waiting for the night shift. All right, she said finally. You go, but promise me one thing. What? If you are right, be humble, and if you are wrong, be even humbler. The next morning, Ethan went to school early. The science teacher, Mr. Garrett, was surprised when he saw Ethan's name on the application form. You have not submitted a formal project this year. I have a paper, Ethan said. It is on gravitational radius variation in rotating black holes, and I am building a simulation on a public code base to model it. Garrett raised an eyebrow. That is graduate-level physics. I know, Ethan said quietly. But I think it matters. Garrett studied him. Ethan was not arrogant. He was not trying to impress anyone. He looked like someone carrying a weight too big for his shoulders, but determined to hold it anyway. I will see what I can do, Garrett said. That evening, Ethan sat in the town library's computer room, headphones on. He was watching a debate from a 2008 physics conference, Grayson versus Thorne. They argued over whether dark matter should have any role in black hole geometry. Grayson had suggested that future models might allow non-baryonic matter to warp horizons directly. But even back then, the idea had been met with skepticism. Black hole solutions. Kip Thorne had said are derived from the Einstein field equations. You don't just add terms like decorations on a tree. And yet now, years later, Grayson had added one. A week passed. Ethan got the letter he was accepted for the trip. His mother cried softly in the kitchen. Not because of the science, but because she was proud and terrified and did not know how she would afford the gas money for the school van. Ethan hugged her. I won't embarrass anyone, he promised. You never have, she whispered. Late that night, as the wind howled outside, Ethan sat at the dining table drawing a graph. He plotted the horizon radius with the beta term and without it for various values of angular momentum. At high J, the two graphs diverged, and in some cases Grayson's model predicted no horizon at all, just a naked singularity. A mistake like that could lead to serious problems in real simulations, especially if used in the Event Horizon telescopes. Next data set. Ethan leaned back, staring at the ceiling. He was not a scientist, but he was a student, and students ask questions. 2 days before the trip, Ethan printed his notes, folded them carefully, and put them in the inside pocket of his jacket. He knew the other students would be dressed better. They would have proper laptops, neat presentations, parents with resumes full of university degrees. He had none of that, but he had curiosity and a single thought that would not leave him alone. Why hasn't anyone else noticed this, back in Harvard? In a quiet office with tall windows and rows of physics books, Professor Leonard Grayson sat reviewing a grant proposal. He did not remember Ethan's email. In fact, he rarely saw anything the assistant filtered out. But a week earlier, his research assistant, Marcus Hale, had paused when he saw the beta term in a slideshow. Isn't that a bit speculative? Marcus had asked. Grayson waved it off. Just a placeholder. A demonstration. But it is in the published version. Grayson frowned. That is not possible. It was not wait. I thought I had removed it. He checked the preprint on RxIve. There it was. beta squared in black ink. Well, he muttered. I suppose it slipped through. He made a note to update the paper. Then he leaned back. It does not change the conclusions, he said aloud, almost to himself. But something in the back of his mind, a tick, a whisper nudged him, and far away in a snowy town in Vermont, a boy zipped up his only jacket, packed a worn notebook, and checked the sky one last time before sleep tomorrow. He would be closer to the stars, and perhaps someone would finally listen. The van smelled like old coffee, plastic seats, and wet mittens. A banner taped on the side read, Vermont State Science Fair Finalists, Cambridge Trip, though the tape had started peeling in the corners. The road out of Linden was still damp from the night rain, and soft mist clung to the trees like ghostly fabric. Ethan Miller sat in the back row, next to the emergency window, holding a cloth-bound notebook close to his chest. His winter jacket was 2 sizes too big and had a tear in the sleeve where insulation poked out like white feathers. He didn't mind. He wasn't thinking about the jacket or the cold. He was thinking about the black hole. He had written the formula in his notebook more than 100 times. R equals GM over C squared plus SQRT of GM over C squared squared, J over mech squared squared. And in Grayson's model, that one added term, plus beta squared, was like a tiny crack in the base of a tower. At first, no one sees it. But one day, everything built on top of it shifts. Ethan looked out the window. He had never been to a city, never seen the Charles River or the red brick buildings of Harvard. But he had seen the stars, and somehow that felt like enough. In the seat in front of him, 2 other students whispered about projects. One had built a drone that collected soil data. The other had done something with AI and bee populations. You just bringing a notebook? The taller boy asked, turning around. Not unkindly, just curious. Ethan nodded. It's mostly math. Oh, the boy said. Cool. He turned back. Ethan didn't mind. Not everyone needed to understand. He wasn't here to impress anyone. He was here to speak, even if his voice was small. The Harvard campus looked like something out of a storybook. Ivy-covered walls, bell towers, students walking in clusters wearing scarves and backpacks heavier than they were. Ethan felt like a ghost among them. The science conference was held in a tall building with stone steps and wide windows, Harvard Hall. Inside, rows of folding tables had been arranged with student posters, laptop displays, and small physical models. Some stations had teams of 2 or 3 students. Others had elaborate trifold displays with color-coded graphs and QR codes for judges. Ethan had none of that. He found a small table near the back, unpacked his notebook, and laid out 3 printed pages of equations and graphs. He didn't have a title banner, just a simple paper labeled, A Note on the Kerr Metric and the Horizon Boundary Under Angular Momentum Extremes, by Ethan Miller, Linden Middle School. No one stopped at his table. A few judges walked by, glanced at the math, and moved on. He wasn't surprised. He sat quietly, watching the flow of people, waiting, not for an award, but for a single conversation. At noon, they broke for lunch. Students spread across the courtyard with sandwiches and apple juice boxes. Ethan stayed inside, sitting alone on the stairs. He pulled out his peanut butter sandwich, packed by his mom that morning, and stared at the sky through the glass dome above the hall. A voice behind him broke the silence. You're the kid with the black hole paper. Ethan turned. A man in his late 20s stood holding a thermos and a Harvard ID card clipped to his coat. His hair was messy, and he looked tired, but curious. I'm Marcus, the man said, PhD candidate in astrophysics. I read your note. You did? Ethan's voice cracked slightly. I thought it was a prank at first. Then I started running your numbers. Marcus sat beside him. I've worked with Professor Grayson for the last 2 years, he continued. I know the equation you're talking about. The beta term. We argued about it for weeks. So why did he keep it? Marcus took a long sip from his thermos. Because it made the model match the EHT data a little more neatly. But physics doesn't bend for convenience. You're right. That extra term creates instability in extreme spin conditions. The horizon disappears. Ethan's hands tightened on his notebook. I emailed him, Ethan said quietly. No one answered. I'm not surprised, Marcus muttered. He's protective of his models. And frankly, no one expects a middle schooler from Vermont to check his math. Ethan didn't speak. Marcus looked at him sideways. Do you want to show it to him? In person? Ethan's eyes widened. Right now? Come with me. The walk to the department building was quiet. Ethan's heart thudded in his chest. This wasn't the plan. He had imagined maybe a kind judge would read his work, or maybe an email would reach someone months later. Not today. Not him. Walking beside someone with a Harvard badge, into an office that smelled like old paper and black coffee. Professor Grayson's door was open. He sat at his desk, reading from a tablet, glasses low on his nose. He looked up. Marcus, I thought you were at the science event. I was, Marcus said. This is Ethan Miller. He wrote the note about the beta term. Grayson blinked, then frowned. You're the one who emailed last week. Ethan nodded. I didn't reply, Grayson said. Because I assumed it wasn't serious. It is, Ethan said softly. I think the term makes the model unstable. Grayson stood slowly. His voice was calm but edged. You think my metric is incorrect? I think it introduces a discontinuity at high angular momentum, Ethan said. When J approaches maximal Kerr limit, the root becomes imaginary. That means the event horizon vanishes, and that shouldn't happen, not in a physical black hole. Marcus crossed his arms. He's right. Grayson looked from Marcus to Ethan. Something in his face flickered. Irritation, maybe, or something deeper. I have taught this model for 20 years. Ethan nodded. But physics isn't about years. It's about numbers. The silence that followed felt like a held breath. Then Grayson sat down, rubbed his temples. Show me, he said. For the next hour, Ethan wrote on the whiteboard, carefully, clearly. He outlined the derivation, the boundary conditions, the breakdown at J close to mx squared. He compared the classic Kerr solution with Grayson's modified term. Grayson didn't interrupt. At the end, Ethan stepped back. The model works for low spin, he said, but fails at the edge cases. Grayson stood, walked to the board. For a moment he didn't speak. Then, I made a mistake. It was barely a whisper. He turned to Ethan. And you caught it. Ethan looked down. I just wanted to understand. Grayson stared at the board again. I'll issue a correction to the preprint, he looked at Marcus. Make sure this is added to the record. Then, finally, he looked back at Ethan. You should keep studying. I will, Ethan said. Outside, as the sun lowered behind the towers, Marcus walked Ethan back toward the science fair. I don't think you'll win a ribbon, Marcus said. Ethan smiled. That's okay. But you might have just corrected a Harvard black hole model, that's something. Ethan looked up at the sky, still pale with daylight. They're just numbers, he said. But numbers lead to truth. Marcus grinned. I'll keep in touch. And when you're ready, I've got a real telescope you can borrow. Ethan's face lit up. Back in Vermont, Rebecca stood by the window as the bus pulled in. Ethan stepped off, carrying nothing but his old notebook, but his eyes were different, brighter, steadier. "How was it?" she asked. Ethan smiled. "I didn't win," he said. She hugged him tight. "But I think," he added softly, "someone listened." The lecture hall was enormous. Vaulted ceilings, arched windows, wooden benches polished by generations of students. In the center stood a podium of dark mahogany, carved with the university's crest. The emblem of Harvard. Ethan had never been in a room like this. He sat quietly near the back, his notebook resting on his lap, his pencil hovering between his fingers like a tuning fork waiting for the right vibration. He was the youngest person in the hall by decades. To his right, a row of graduate students murmured about thermal radiation and tensor fields. To his left, a woman with silver hair clutched a notepad filled with delicate equations in perfect cursive. The atmosphere was reverent. Every shuffle, every whisper, every tap of a pen seemed to echo off the walls. Ethan's name was not on any program. He had not been invited to this closed session of the Black Hole Geometry Symposium. But Marcus had quietly added his name to the guest list that morning. "You'll want to hear this," Marcus had said. "Grayson is presenting the final form of his Kerr horizon correction. You should be in the room." Ethan hadn't argued. He didn't want a confrontation. He only wanted to listen. But sometimes listening leads to speaking. Professor Leonard Grayson stepped up to the podium at 11:03 a.m. He wore a gray suit with a subtle pinstripe, glasses resting low on his nose, and a red scarf tucked into his coat pocket. His presence commanded silence. The screen behind him lit up with a title, "A Refined Interpretation of Horizon Geometry in Rotating Black Holes, Dr. Leonard Grayson, Harvard Department of Physics." Ethan's pencil began to move, quietly, as Grayson began. "Good morning. Today, I will walk you through a refined derivation of the horizon radius in rotating massive objects, incorporating dark matter interaction and angular momentum stressors. Slide 1. The Einstein field equations. Familiar. Ethan whispered them silently to himself like a prayer. Slide 2. The Schwarzschild metric. Slide 3. The Kerr metric. And then, Slide 4. There it was again, plus V2, squared and prominent, sitting within the square root term like a smudge on glass. Ethan stopped writing. Professor Grayson's voice echoed through the wood and stone. This additional term accounts for potential curvature adjustments in the presence of weakly interacting massive particles, WIMPs, as outlined in the recent theoretical proposal by Lin and Petrova. He clicked to the next slide. Ethan's fingers twitched, not in anger, in certainty. He had run the math. He had double-checked the units. He had written to the professor. And now, here it was again. He looked around. Dozens of faces, all focused, not one hand raised. His own hand lifted, hesitant at first, trembling slightly, then still. Grayson paused. "Yes?" The voice that came from the back of the room was high, quiet, but unwavering. "Sir," Ethan said, "that term doesn't belong there." A silence fell like snow. The room turned slowly toward him, heads twisting in unison. A few students chuckled politely. An older man raised an eyebrow. Grayson stared. "Excuse me?" Ethan stood up, his notebook clutched to his chest like a shield. But his voice steadied. "That V-squared term in the square root. It violates the Kerr stability condition when angular momentum approaches the extremal limit." Grayson's eyes narrowed. "And who are you?" "My name is Ethan Miller. I'm 13. I study independently in Vermont. I've been working through the derivation using the Einstein tensor and Boyer-Lindquist coordinates." A pause. A longer one. Grayson cleared his throat. This is a graduate seminar. I know, Ethan replied. But the math doesn't care where I go to school. A soft murmur moved through the room like wind in trees. Marcus, standing in the aisle, broke the tension. I've seen his notes, he said. He's not wrong. Grayson looked as if he'd swallowed a stone. His hands gripped the podium. That term represents a hypothetical curvature correction. But it's unbounded, Ethan answered. And it causes the square root to go imaginary under real-world spin values. That means the horizon disappears before it should. Grayson tapped his laser pointer nervously. It's meant to be a minor correction. But it creates a major error, Ethan said. At j over max squared greater than 1, the discriminant becomes negative. That predicts a naked singularity. The hall went still. A professor in the second row raised his hand. Can the boy show us? Grayson looked torn. Angry? Embarrassed? Or something deeper? Challenged? He gestured to the board behind him. Then let's see. Ethan walked slowly down the steps. His boots were muddy and his sleeves were too long. He looked impossibly small beside the great chalkboard and the figures of academia in long coats and conference badges. But the second he picked up the chalk, something shifted. He didn't hesitate. Step by step, he rederived the Kerr metric, the metric tensor components, the horizon condition, Girard inverse equals 0, the discriminant inside the root, the impact of the added V2 term. And finally, he underlined the conclusion in quiet, simple writing. If B2 is real and positive, then for high J, R becomes complex. No event horizon. The model breaks. He stepped back. The chalk dust clung to his fingers. No one spoke for several seconds. Then, the silver-haired woman in the second row stood up. He's right. Another professor stood. I ran simulations using this very metric for the EHT projection models. I've seen instability in edge cases. This explains it. Grayson stared at the board as if it had turned into a mirror. Then, I apologize, he said. His voice was barely audible. He looked not at Ethan, but at the room. The correction will be removed. After the session, the hallway buzzed with voices. Not loud, not mocking, just amazed. A few students nodded respectfully to Ethan as they passed. You actually stood up, one whispered. Marcus walked beside him, grinning. You're a quiet kind of brave. I didn't want to embarrass him, Ethan said. You didn't, Marcus replied. You reminded us why we do this. That night, Ethan sat alone beneath the Harvard courtyard clock tower. The bell tolled softly in the dark. He opened his notebook. On the front page, he wrote 3 new words in neat, small script. Ask with honor. Then he looked up, and for the first time in days, the sky over Cambridge was clear. The applause had faded. The chalk had been wiped from the board, and the bright light of reason, brief as it was now flickering in the shadow of bureaucracy. Harvard Hall, once alive with murmurs of admiration and curiosity after Ethan's quiet takedown of the Kerr correction, had fallen still. The corridors cleared. The notebooks were closed. But inside the physics department's 4th-floor office, behind a thick wooden door marked Dr. Leonard Grayson, astrophysics, the real discussion was just beginning. Ethan wasn't in that room, but his name was. Dr. Leonard Grayson stood at the head of the long, narrow meeting table, arms folded, eyes red from a sleepless night. He had invited, or rather summoned, a few key voices. Marcus Hale, his graduate researcher, Dean Walter Price, head of the physics department, and 2 postdocs involved in the university's black hole simulation grant, a multi-million-dollar collaboration with the Event Horizon Telescope Consortium. The mood was tense. Well, Dean Price began. His voice was smooth, polished. Is it true? Grayson didn't answer right away. Instead, he opened his leather-bound folder and pulled out two versions of the Kerr-Horizon derivation, his and the one from Ethan's notebook, scanned and printed by Marcus. "I reviewed it again last night," Grayson said slowly. "The boy, he's correct. The added beta-squared term introduces a critical instability at high angular momentum. It invalidates the model for rotating singularities above the Kerr limit." Dean Price raised an eyebrow. "So we published an invalid correction?" Marcus cut in, calm but firm. "It was never peer-reviewed. It was a public lecture, a preprint." Grayson exhaled sharply. "And it was meant to be provisional, an illustration. I never intended for it to be included in simulation models." One of the postdocs, Dr. Lin, shifted uncomfortably. "Except it was. We used it in two of the EHT simulations for Sagittarius A-star last quarter." Silence. Dean Price's jaw tightened. "Do you have any idea what this could mean?" he said quietly. "We're about to submit a proposal to the National Science Foundation for renewed funding. If this comes out, if the press gets wind that a 13-year-old pointed out a fundamental flaw in a Harvard model," Grayson straightened, "then let the press talk. The boy was right." "That's not the point," Price snapped. Marcus leaned forward. "Then what is the point?" Price turned to him. "The point is that institutions like ours don't survive on truth alone. We survive on reputation, on stability, on public trust. And we cannot have headlines about amateur prodigies exposing our senior faculty during recorded lectures." He paused, looked at Grayson. "Fix the model, quietly. No press, no retraction, no public statement." Grayson looked stunned. "That's dishonest." "That's protective," Price replied coldly. Meanwhile, across campus, Ethan sat alone on the stone steps of a library annex, unaware of the conversation unfolding behind polished doors. He was supposed to be attending the afternoon symposium, but something in him felt unsettled. Not because of what he had said, but because of what followed, the way the professors had looked at one another, whispering after the session, the way Grayson had refused to meet his eye as he left the lecture hall. Marcus joined him moments later, a coffee in each hand. "You did the hard part," he said, handing Ethan the warm cup. "Now comes the harder part." Ethan tilted his head. "What do you mean?" Marcus sat beside him. "You showed the truth, but sometimes truth doesn't move people. It threatens them." "I wasn't trying to threaten anyone," Ethan said quickly. "I just didn't want the numbers to be wrong." "I know," Marcus nodded. "But departments like this, they're not built for disruption. They're built for preservation." Ethan looked down. "Are they going to fix it?" Marcus hesitated. "They're going to fix it privately, quietly, without crediting you." The boy's hands curled slightly around the cup. "That's okay," he said. "I don't need credit. You deserve it." Ethan looked up. "But I'd rather the equation be right than my name be known." Later that day, Marcus received a message. "You're advised not to distribute the students' materials further. Consider this a matter of departmental discretion." WP attached was a warning. If Marcus continued supporting the unsanctioned disclosure of pre-publication material, his research funding would be reviewed. He stared at the message for a long time. Then he opened his desktop folder labeled Ethan Model. Inside were scanned pages from Ethan's notebook, clean simulations using the corrected metric, and a side-by-side comparison of horizon geometry in spin-extreme conditions. He clicked Upload, not to the Harvard server, but to a public forum for theoretical physicists, the Gravity Collective, hosted in Germany, moderated by a group of independent researchers. He attached one line: "Unreviewed correction to Kerr horizon metrics, submitted by an independent student observer." Feedback welcome. MH. Then, he hit send. The next morning, Ethan was getting ready to return to Vermont. His bag was already packed. He stood in the empty dorm guest room provided by the symposium, looking out the frosted window at the rising sun over Cambridge rooftops. The door creaked. Marcus entered, holding a folded sheet of paper. "You've started something," he said. Ethan turned. "Did I get in trouble?" "No." Marcus smiled faintly, "but others might." He handed Ethan the paper. It was a printout from the Gravity Collective. Dozens of comments had appeared in the last 12 hours. Researchers from Germany, Switzerland, and Canada were already running the corrected metric. One physicist had confirmed that removing the beta term restored consistency with their observational model. "They're not mocking it?" Ethan asked. Marcus shook his head. "They're thanking you." Ethan sat down slowly on the edge of the bed. "I didn't think it would matter." "It does," Marcus said. "And it's not over yet." Back at Harvard, behind those closed doors, Dean Price stared at his screen in disbelief. The Post had gone live. The correction was now public knowledge, and the phrase "independent student observer" was already trending among certain science forums. He slammed the laptop shut. "This cannot continue." Grayson stood quietly across the room, arms crossed. "Then maybe it's time we let it." "You're defending him now?" "I'm defending physics," Grayson said. "The equation was wrong. He saw it. You want to protect our names, but he protected the truth. And what do you expect? That we hand the field over to a child?" Grayson walked toward the door. "No," he said, "but maybe we should listen when he speaks." That evening, on the bus back to Vermont, Ethan sat by the window, watching snowflakes blur past the glass. His notebook was tucked away. His thoughts, unusually, weren't on black holes. They were on the silence. Not the silence of stars or equations, but the silence of institutions when confronted with a truth too inconvenient. He didn't regret standing up, but he now understood why so few did. His mother would ask how the trip went. He would say it was fine. He wouldn't tell her about the meetings, the tension, the threat to Marcus. She didn't need that weight. She just needed to know her son had spoken up. And that somewhere out there a few stars burned a little clearer because of it. For 3 days, Vermont felt colder than usual. Not because of snow, but because of silence. Ethan was back in his small town. Same cracked sidewalks, same rusty swings at the park, same warm kitchen where his mother reheated soup from a can and asked him how the Harvard trip went. "It was good," Ethan said, stirring alphabet noodles he no longer cared to read. His mother smiled. She didn't press. She saw the tired look in his eyes. Not the tired of travel, but of knowing something others didn't want to know. Upstairs, Ethan opened his laptop. The Wi-Fi barely held, but it was enough to check the science forums. The Gravity Collective thread had now passed 300 comments. Several physicists in Europe and South America had validated Ethan's model. One from a lab in Santiago even wrote, "We've updated our simulation engine to remove the beta correction. Thank you to the student who raised this. Impressive clarity of reasoning." But on the American forums? Silence. The kind of silence that had weight. Marcus called on the 4th evening. "They've started freezing access," he said bluntly. "To what?" "To my data sets, the research server, and I've been uninvited from next month's EHT collaboration session." Quietly. No explanation. Ethan sat very still. "Because of the Post?" "Because of you," Marcus said, but not unkindly. "They're framing it as an unauthorized leak. They think it made Harvard look bad." "I didn't leak anything," Ethan whispered. "It wasn't even a paper. Just a question." "I know." There was a pause. "Are you okay?" Marcus finally asked. "I'm just tired," Ethan said. "I didn't think this would make people angry." Marcus let out a bitter chuckle. "Sometimes truth isn't the thing people fear, it's who delivers it." The next morning, Ethan and his mom were in the kitchen when the landline rang. Rebecca picked it up, pressing the receiver to her ear. "Hello?" She listened for a few seconds. Her expression changed, then she hung up slowly. "Wrong number?" Ethan asked. She didn't answer right away. Then, "Someone said, 'Your boy should learn when to stay in his lane,'" and hung up. Ethan froze. His mother walked over, knelt beside him. "Was that about Harvard?" "I think so," he said, voice dry. She reached up and cupped his face gently. "I don't understand this physics world of yours. But I know right from wrong, and I know you told the truth. I didn't mean to hurt anyone." She nodded. "And that's what makes you different from them." That evening, an official-looking envelope arrived at their small mailbox. Stamped with Cambridge, M.A., the return address was the Harvard Physics Department. Inside was a single page, no signature, just a brief, formal notice. "Your recent participation in a closed academic forum has raised concerns about the dissemination of non-reviewed material. While we encourage curiosity and academic engagement, please refrain from presenting theoretical content without proper institutional oversight. Departmental Review Committee." Ethan read it 3 times. No thank you, no we've reviewed your correction, not even a name. Just a warning. A quiet, cold push. At school, things got stranger. Mr. Garrett, the science teacher who had helped Ethan attend the trip, now avoided his gaze. When Ethan approached after class to show him a new notebook page, Garrett smiled politely, then said, "That's impressive, Ethan. But maybe take a little break from the physics stuff for now." A break? From thinking? The pushback was no longer invisible. It was in the air. In how people paused before saying Harvard, in how Marcus stopped receiving invitations, in how no one from the department had reached out again, not even to ask a question. It was the quiet pressure that institutions used not to erase the truth, but to exhaust it. And Ethan felt it. He tried to bury himself in the stars again. He set up the telescope in the backyard, but the sky didn't seem the same. Not because the stars had changed, but because now he knew how fiercely people defended their right to misunderstand them. Marcus emailed late one night. Subject, "You okay?" Ethan replied, "I think so, just confused. Why are they so afraid of being wrong?" Marcus responded, "Because if they're wrong and you're right, then their titles mean less, and your honesty means more. And that's terrifying to them." That weekend, Ethan went to the town library to use the better computer. He didn't check the forums. He didn't open his simulation files. He opened a blank Word document and typed slowly. "Questions I Wasn't Allowed to Ask" by Ethan Miller. He didn't know if he would send it anywhere, but he needed to write it. He wrote about the beta-squared term, about how it seemed small but broke the model, about how no one wanted to hear it, even when the math proved it, about how the people who claimed to love truth only loved it when it came from someone their own size. He didn't write with anger. He wrote with clarity. And then he saved the file. That night, as snow fell over Linden, Ethan sat by the window with a mug of cocoa. His mother had gone to bed early. The stars outside blinked softly. He opened his notebook and turned to a clean page. At the top, he wrote, "What comes next?" Underneath, he drew a small dot. Then, carefully, he began sketching out a new model. A way of correcting the Kerr solution not by adding arbitrary terms, but by rethinking its boundary conditions entirely. He didn't know if it would work. But he knew he would try. Because what they didn't understand was this: he hadn't come to break anything. He had come to understand. And there was nothing more dangerous than someone who asked questions not to win, but to learn. Ethan Miller had never set out to prove anyone wrong. He wasn't a rebel. He wasn't angry. He just couldn't ignore something that didn't make sense. And now, after warnings, silence, and thinly veiled threats, he made a quiet decision. He would not argue anymore. He would prove it. The public library in Linden, Vermont was small, only 4 computers, 2 of which barely ran modern software. But Miss Holloway, the librarian, always saved the one near the window for Ethan. "Working on your star math again?" she asked with a kind smile, handing him a sticky note with the login password. "Yes, ma'am," Ethan said. He loaded up the machine. The mouse was slow, the monitor slightly dim, but it was enough. He downloaded an open-source relativistic physics simulation tool called GeoGrav, developed by a European university. It had a flexible metric editor and the ability to model space-time curvature near rotating massive objects. Most users ran pre-built scenarios. Ethan rewrote the geometry from scratch. He input the classical Kerr metric, then added the modified version with the V2 term, just as Professor Grayson had used in his lecture. He ran the simulation twice, side by side. At moderate spin levels, both models produced similar results, but when he increased the spin parameter a(j)(m), approaching the extreme limit, close to 1, the difference emerged. On the left, the original Kerr solution showed a shrinking but real event horizon. On the right, the modified version caused the root to go negative. The horizon disappeared. That wasn't just a theoretical issue, it broke the geometry. The program crashed. The rendered model twisted, space folded into itself. And not in a black hole way, in a bad math way. He reset, tried again, same result. Ethan clicked record and captured the simulations. Then he opened a spreadsheet and began listing results. For each input spin value, from 0.1 to 0.99, he recorded horizon radius under both models. He calculated error margins. He graphed them. The divergence curve looked like a canyon. At high spins, the difference between models was not a rounding error, it was catastrophic. He sat back and exhaled. The numbers were no longer ideas, they were now evidence. That night, Ethan didn't sleep. He stayed up revising. On his bedroom wall hung the old star charts from his grandfather, worn, yellowing maps of constellations. Beneath them, on his desk, sat a printed report with graphs, screenshots, notes. On the cover page, stability breakdown in the modified Kerr horizon metric, a simulation report by Ethan Miller, Linden, Vermont. He didn't write student. He didn't write child. He let the math speak. The next morning, he emailed a copy to Marcus. Subject, final report, simulation proof. Message, no need to argue anymore. Marcus sat in a Boston coffee shop when the email came through. He opened it. 10 minutes later, he stood up, left his coffee untouched, and walked straight to the MIT lab across the river. He found an old friend, Dr. Neha Kulkarni, postdoc in gravitational imaging. "Read this," Marcus said, handing her the report. "From the kid?" she asked. "From Ethan," he corrected. She sat down, skimmed, slowed, then leaned forward. "These are clean runs," she said. "Where did he get this software?" "He modified an open-source package." Neha shook her head in disbelief. "You realize this proves the instability is not theoretical. This affects real simulations." Marcus nodded. "That's why I brought it to you." "Not Harvard?" He gave her a look. "Right," she said. "They're still in hiding." Within 48 hours, Neha posted the report on her professional blog with a note. An independent simulation by Ethan Miller confirms the instability introduced by the V2 term in rotating black hole metrics. Clean logic, clean evidence, worth your time. Dr. N. Kulkarni, MIT. The blog was followed by researchers worldwide. And this time, the silence broke. The inbox Ethan used for math forums began to fill. From Germany. Would you be willing to submit this as a short note to our journal? From Chile. We are updating our own code to reflect your correction. Thank you. From a retired professor in Scotland. You reminded me what it felt like to discover truth for the first time. And then, the message Ethan had never expected. From Leonard Grayson. Subject: I've read your proof. Message: Ethan, I owe you an apology, not just for doubting you, but for dismissing you. I see now that your correction is not only valid, but necessary. I've submitted an erratum to the preprint. You are credited. Thank you for your persistence and your clarity. L. Grayson. Ethan read it twice, then once more, just to be sure. He didn't cry. He didn't cheer. He just nodded, slowly, and went back to work. That night, as snow dusted the quiet Vermont streets, Ethan and his mother walked home from the store. The brown bag she carried held 2 cans of soup and a pack of printer paper. For your numbers, she'd said. You've been quiet, she told him. Quieter than usual. I sent in the proof, he said. They listened. She smiled. All of them? Not all, but enough. She looked at him closely. You okay? I think I am, he said. I didn't shout. I didn't fight. I just showed them. That's all your granddad ever said you needed to do, she whispered. Let the work speak. In his room, under the soft desk lamp, Ethan opened a new notebook. On the first page, he wrote, When the numbers are true, they don't need a loud voice. They need a clear one. He didn't know what problem he would work on next. But he knew this. When truth is quiet, it must be clean. When no one trusts your age, let them trust your math. And when they push back, you don't push harder. You prove. The snow was beginning to melt in Vermont. Small rivers of slush crept down the sidewalks, and the library's roof dripped steadily onto the bushes below. Ethan still walked there every day. He sat at his usual computer, the one next to the dusty shelf of astronomy books, and refreshed the same 3 pages. The Gravity Collective, Dr. Kulkarni's blog, and a physics subreddit where someone had posted, 13-year-old corrects black hole model used by Harvard. Can anyone verify? The post had one reply. Yes, verified. I teach GR at Leiden. He's right. Ethan leaned back in his chair, blinking at the words. He hadn't expected the math to go far. He just wanted the truth to land somewhere, anywhere, where it wouldn't be deleted, buried, or ignored. But now, like a spark falling in dry grass, it had started to spread. That afternoon, Marcus called. You're in trouble, he said. Ethan's stomach dropped. What happened? Not the bad kind, Marcus chuckled. The famous kind. He sent Ethan a link. It was a headline from Science Now. Teenager uncovers flaw in Harvard black hole model, what it means for astrophysics. Below it, a subhead. Ethan Miller, a 13-year-old from Vermont, quietly corrected a key aspect of rotating black hole metrics used in global simulations. His findings are now prompting a re-evaluation of published models. Ethan stared at the screen. Why would they write about me? Because truth travels fast, Marcus said. And nothing moves faster than a story the press didn't expect. By evening, his email inbox had doubled. Professors, students, Journalists? Some of the messages were thoughtful. I'm using your model to teach the limits of Kerr stability in my graduate class. Well done. Others were awkward attempts at connection. My nephew is also smart for his age. Do you want to be pen pals? Some were interviews. He didn't answer any of them. Not yet. Instead, he opened a new document and titled it, Response to Public Inquiries, Ethan Miller. He wrote in plain language, I am grateful that people are reading the report. I'm not trying to be a genius or prove anyone wrong. I just wanted the math to be clean. I still have a lot to learn. Thank you for listening. He posted it quietly to Dr. Kulkarni's blog as an update. No drama, no bragging, just the same voice he had used from the beginning. But elsewhere, voices were rising. At Harvard, the physics department's phones rang non-stop. News outlets were requesting statements. Former students were tweeting links to the lecture where Ethan had spoken up. Grayson's original whiteboard presentation had already been clipped and uploaded to YouTube by a viewer who labeled it, The Moment Harvard Got Corrected by a Kid, 1.7M views in 48 hours. Grayson watched it once, then closed his laptop and sat very still. Dean Walter Price, however, was not still. He paced the length of his office, hands behind his back, as two advisors spoke in hushed tones. This cannot become a scandal, Price said. It must be reframed. How do you reframe a viral video? The younger advisor asked. You don't, Price said. You delay it. You flood it with something else. You issue a statement highlighting collaboration. You say the model was under review, that the correction was part of ongoing peer refinement. The other advisor raised a quiet concern. But it wasn't. Of course it wasn't, Price snapped. But the public doesn't care about timeline, they care about tone. There was silence. Then a third voice spoke from the doorway. It was Grayson. No, he said. We won't spin this. Price turned. Leonard, I already issued the correction, Grayson said. I've credited the boy publicly. We failed to catch the flaw. He didn't. That's the story. He's 13, Price hissed. Grayson nodded. Which says more about us than about him. Meanwhile, back in Vermont, Ethan did something strange. He turned off his computer. He put on his boots. And he walked to the hill behind his house where his grandfather's old telescope still stood, creaky and frostbitten, pointed at the stars. He looked up. Cygnus had shifted. Orion was fading into spring. The sky never stayed the same. He whispered to it. I didn't mean to start anything. I just didn't want things to be wrong. The sky, as always, did not reply. But a quiet wind brushed his cheek. The next morning, Ethan's mom stood on the porch, holding her coffee, watching a black car pull up in front of their home. A woman in a scarf stepped out, holding a camera bag. I'm from NPR, she said gently. We're hoping to do a story, if your son is willing. Ethan peeked from the window. His mother turned toward the door. Ethan? She called. He didn't answer right away. Then, can I just write instead? She looked back at the woman. He says he'll write. Later that day, a letter appeared on Ethan's blog. It was titled, The Line Between Question and Correction. I didn't try to prove anything. I didn't think anyone would listen. I saw a mistake. I checked it again and again. Then I asked a question. And I kept asking, even when they didn't answer. I think science should be okay with questions. I'm not a genius. I'm just a kid who likes stars. If there's a lesson in this, maybe it's this. Let kids ask. Let math win. Ethan Miller. The letter was shared 50,000 times in 2 days. Back at Harvard, the final update came quietly. Grayson posted a formal correction to the original paper. It read, We thank Ethan Miller of Vermont for identifying the instability introduced by the V2 term. His observation has led to a more accurate representation of rotating horizon metrics. May this serve as a reminder that the pursuit of truth honors no titles, only clarity. And at the bottom, in a bold line, this work is dedicated to the curious. It had snowed again in Vermont. Ethan stood by the window, watching flakes gather on the old stone fence outside. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't excited. He felt something deeper, a kind of quiet readiness, like the sky before a meteor shower. On the kitchen table sat a manila envelope postmarked from Cambridge. Inside, an official invitation. Harvard Physics Department invites Ethan Miller to participate in a special forum on open inquiry, student research, and the evolution of black hole modeling. Date, March 28th. Time, 2:00 p.m. Location, Harvard Hall, Lecture Auditorium. His mother read it 3 times before speaking. "You don't have to go, Ethan," she said. "You've already said what mattered." He looked down at his hands. But they listened. She nodded, proud and quiet. "Then wear something warm." Harvard Hall looked exactly the same. High wood-paneled ceilings, tall windows, benches filled with minds. But this time, the seats were packed. Not just students and professors, but journalists, cameras, guests with press badges. Ethan even spotted someone with a NASA jacket near the back. And on the small stage at the front, 3 chairs had been set. One for Professor Leonard Grayson, one for Marcus Hale, and one, shorter than the rest, for Ethan. Dean Walter Price took the podium first. "This forum," he said carefully, "is not an apology. It is not a disciplinary hearing. It is not a press stunt. It is simply an exercise in transparency." He gestured to the crowd. "We in academia live and breathe inquiry. We encourage students to question, to seek, to challenge, but we don't always expect that challenge to come from outside our walls or from someone so young." Polite laughter rippled through the audience. Then he stepped aside. "Dr. Grayson will now speak." Grayson stood slowly. He looked older than before, not worn, but changed, like someone who had been reminded of something he'd forgotten. "6 weeks ago," he began, "I delivered a lecture in this very hall on rotating black holes. I presented a variation of the Kerr metric with an added correction term, beta squared, meant to account for speculative dark matter influence." He paused. That term was incorrect. No gasps. Everyone already knew. But hearing him say it, publicly, clearly, mattered. "I was corrected not by a peer," he continued, "not by a committee, but by a 13-year-old from Vermont. A boy named Ethan Miller." He turned. "And he is sitting here with us today." All eyes shifted to Ethan. The cameras turned. Ethan stood. He didn't bow. He didn't smile. He just gave a small nod. Grayson continued. "Ethan saw something others missed. And more importantly, he did what science demands of us. He questioned it, checked it, and persisted." He looked directly at Ethan. "You reminded me of what this work is truly about." Then it was Ethan's turn. He approached the podium slowly, his notebook held to his chest. He looked out at the sea of eyes, the lights, the weight of it all. And then he opened the notebook. "Thank you for letting me speak." His voice was calm, clear, no microphone needed. "I didn't come here to embarrass anyone. I didn't try to prove anything. I just wanted to understand why that equation didn't work." He paused. "Because when a number is wrong in space, it doesn't just stay wrong on paper. It becomes a telescope aimed at the wrong place. A theory that misses, a truth that never lands." A few heads nodded. "I didn't want credit. I wanted clarity." He closed the notebook gently. And I think science should always want that too. The room was still. And then, applause. Long, honest. Marcus spoke last. He didn't take the podium. Just stood beside Ethan. I've worked with some of the best minds in this field, but none of them reminded me why I started studying physics the way Ethan did. He looked at the professors in the front rows, and none of them asked clearer questions. After the event, reporters gathered like moths. Ethan, how does it feel to correct a Harvard professor? What do you want to study next? Do you think you'll go to MIT or Caltech? Are you a genius? Ethan blinked, overwhelmed. But then he said, I'm just a boy who likes stars. And that was enough. The next day, a new video appeared online. The Boy Who Corrected Harvard, full forum recording. It passed 5 million views in a week. Educators shared it in classrooms. Astronomers passed it to interns. Parents showed it to their kids. And a quiet truth spread. Knowledge does not care how old you are. That spring, Ethan returned to Vermont. He didn't bring back a trophy, but he brought back something else. A letter from the National Science Foundation offering mentorship in computational modeling. An email from a private telescope initiative inviting him to help review student-submitted equations, and a grant from a science nonprofit, enough to buy a proper laptop, software, and most importantly, a new telescope. Not to replace his grandfather's, just to sit beside it. One for the past, one for what comes next. That summer, on a quiet hill in Vermont, 2 telescopes pointed into the sky, one old, one new, and beside them, a boy sat with a worn notebook on his knees, scribbling. Not because he wanted to be brilliant, but because something in the stars still didn't make sense. And that was the best reason of all to keep looking. It was a warm morning in early August when Ethan walked back into the barn. It had been his grandfather's welding shed. Years of scorched metal, rusted tools, and oil stains that no soap would ever lift. But now, the floor was swept, the walls were patched, and the smell of steel had been replaced by pencils, paper, old books, plastic chairs, a classroom, small, quiet, real. Outside, the fields of Vermont swayed under the sun. Inside, 5 kids, ages 8 to 14, sat in a loose circle, wide-eyed, watching as Ethan placed an old chalkboard on 2 crates. There were no uniforms, no tuition, no nameplate on the wall, but there was something better: curiosity. He picked up a piece of chalk and wrote in big, clear letters, "What if?" Then turned to them. Every big idea, he said, starts with that question. The youngest girl raised her hand. Even black holes? Ethan smiled. Especially black holes. It had been 6 months since the day at Harvard. The forums had quieted. The reporters had moved on. There were no more emails asking for interviews, no phone calls from curious strangers. And Ethan was okay with that. He had returned to Vermont. Not to disappear, but to begin something better. A small foundation, backed by the science nonprofit that had supported him, offered a modest fund to help rural science outreach. Most used it for museum buses. Ethan used it to turn the barn into a lab. He called it the Event Horizon Classroom. Because, he said, that's where knowledge begins, at the edge of what we know. The chalkboard filled slowly each day, not with formulas, at least not right away, but with questions. Why does light bend? Where does a shadow go? Do stars ever forget their burning? Ethan didn't always know the answer, but that was the point. He spent hours building lesson plans from scratch. No textbooks, just stories, drawings, and hands-on models made from string, mirrors, and bicycle wheels. He showed them how space can curve using a sheet and marbles, how time slows with speed using two wind-up clocks on different spinning plates. He didn't mention Einstein, not yet. He only said, "Watch what happens, then ask why." Sometimes he stayed up late, planning. Not to get it perfect, just to make it clear. That was his promise now. Clarity before complexity, wonder before rigor. One afternoon, while cleaning, Ethan found something tucked behind the rafters, a tin box labeled WM 1981. Inside, his grandfather's old notes, star charts, telescope logs, a receipt for a replacement lens dated 1987, and one folded paper, brittle with age, a letter never sent. To whoever finds this, if you're reading this, maybe you see what I see. That space isn't empty. It's waiting. Waiting for someone brave enough to ask questions no one else thinks they're allowed to ask. If you're that person, keep going. I'll be proud of you. Walter Miller. Ethan read the letter 5 times, then placed it in a frame above the chalkboard. He didn't need Harvard's approval. He had his grandfather's. Word spread slowly. The kids came one by one, some shy, some loud, some skeptical. All of them from working families, sons of roofers, daughters of diner waitresses, kids who had never thought about black holes, but suddenly found themselves drawing them in chalk, laughing when they got the spin direction wrong, then trying again. He taught them about the event horizon, but not just the one in physics. He told them about the one inside them. That edge where your old thinking ends, he said, tapping his chest, and the new idea begins. Rebecca Miller, Ethan's mother, watched from the window most days, still working nights, still walking home with sore feet, but lighter now. She never said much about what had happened. Only once, while washing dishes, she said, "Your grandfather would have sat in the front row." Ethan nodded. He still does. One chilly September evening, as golden leaves swirled in the barn's open doorway, Ethan sat alone, grading the kids' questions. Yes, grading the questions, not answers. That was his system, for asks something real, for makes two people think, for no one knows yet. He stopped on one. It read, "What if the universe has a heartbeat?" He smiled. That night, he opened his new telescope. Next to it, his grandfather's still stood, worn but sturdy. He pointed both at the sky, one eye to the past, one to whatever came next, and in his notebook under the title Legacy, he wrote, "I didn't correct Harvard. I corrected a number." And numbers don't belong to anyone. They belong to all of us, especially the ones still brave enough to ask, "What if?" Thank you for watching. To everyone who followed Ethan's quiet journey, from a snowy hill in Vermont to the halls of Harvard, and finally back to a little barn filled with questions. Thank you. This story wasn't about fame or formulas or who was right. It was about truth, and how sometimes the smallest voice can carry the clearest light. If you felt a little more hopeful, a little more curious, a little more seen, then this story found its way to the right person. From one lifelong learner to another. Keep asking, keep wondering, keep your eyes on the stars. And when someone tells you that's not your place, remember Ethan, and ask anyway. With gratitude,